everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Crime and Coffee Couple. My name's Allison.
And my name's Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing fabulous.
Yeah, you sound really good. A little nasally, I'd say.
Yeah.
That's okay. We apologize in advance.
I apologize because it's my fault, but it was funny because we headed up to Chicago for like 5 days. It was not a trip for fun. It was to help Mike's parents settle into their new house.
Yeah, moving from like my childhood home, downsizing to another place. And my parents lived in a sizable home, not like not insane or anything.
Well,
but
with the basement, it was pretty darn big.
Yeah, I mean, the basement's big enough for somebody to live in, basically. So they had a lot of crap accumulated through the years.
Let's just say close to 40 years worth of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we were going through 1970s stuff and whatever. And it was, if they didn't have that amount of space to keep all their stuff, they definitely would be considered like hoarders, I would say.
Well, and it was funny too because we were going through Mike's mom's cosmetics, and I know she listens to this, and I say this with love. I mean, to me, she's like my mom. Mike and I have been together for 30 years, so I've basically known her most of my life.
You're very comfortable with her.
Very comfortable. And, I kept telling her, I'm doing this with respect. I don't want to come in here and bulldoze because I can have a strong personality and I want to be respectful because this is her home and her things, but she did fly us up there to help.
Yeah, well, and it was to save money over hiring somebody that would organize it, like whatever, $80 an hour or whatever.
It was going to be expensive.
Yeah, and they were like, okay, 6 hours for this room, 6 hours for this room. So it was adding up really quick.
The price tag was going up, and Mike's mom had a crap ton of Southwest points, so she just went ahead and flew us up instead because it's a win-win. We get to see them, see their new house, et cetera, et cetera. But I was going along telling the kids, all week long heading up to our trip, like we got to stay healthy because our daughter had the sniffles. And then I woke up at 4 a.m. on the day of our trip, which was a Friday, and I started to feel a little weird. And I was like, oh no, maybe it's just because it's early. And then as we're on the flight over, I was like, oh man. And it just steadily got worse. So it was pretty interesting feeling like hot pile of steaming garbage and then having to just push through and like do physical labor all day long.
When I knew you were really feeling bad was when we were in their new neighborhood. They're in a 55 and over community, so plenty of things to do, big walking paths like all over the neighborhood. One night I was like, well, I'm going to go for a walk with the dog, and you were like, okay, and I was just
not a chance.
Yeah, I was like, okay, you're not going. That's like usually you're in 100%.
I love walking. It's like my favorite form of exercise, but it's funny because every morning I sat on their deck and it looks over this conservation area, and mind you, we're coming from Florida, which is a swamp of hell in the summer. To
only like 6 months of hell. It's
just a few months. Yeah. But the first few days in Chicago was very hot. It was in the 90s, but then the last 2 days were like 70 something, and it was such a respite from the heat. And it's like I didn't even feel it. I was just sitting on their deck looking out in like this dream state. It was like the worst hangover of my entire life every single day.
And you don't drink anymore.
And I don't drink for the past almost 2 years.
Yeah. So it's, it's pretty bad.
Yeah. And then it was funny on the way home, the flight, they made several announcements. The plane is going to be completely full. Every seat will be taken. So I told our daughter, I'm like, the first 2 seats you come to, just take them. And we see this guy sitting in the aisle row with 2 open seats next to him, middle and window. And she's like, oh, excuse me, can we sit in there? And he's just staring at her. And again, she's like a 12-year-old cute little girl. And I look over her shoulder and I said, sir, this is a full flight. If you're not sitting next to us, you will be sitting next to somebody else. Because he had said to her snarkily, if you want to. It's like, no, F-face. I don't want to sit next to your stupid, dumb ASS.
Wow.
I get fired up about people like that.
Yeah, and I was like a couple people behind you guys because we were...
all in a row.
Yeah,
it was like our son was behind me and then you were there. And so when I said that to him, I'm like, it's a completely full flight. You will be sitting next to somebody. And he goes, yeah, no kidding. And then gets up.
And I couldn't hear any of this stuff because the plane's loud, but I just saw the interaction. Like, it was just like, I could see my daughter ask, and he was just kind of like, huh. He
had a full attitude on his face.
And like, this is only like, 10 rows into the plane?
Yes.
So it's like, hey, buddy, you are going to be sitting next to somebody, just like you said.
It was unbelievable, the hostility.
He kind of looked like Brock Lesnar, if anybody's like a WWE fan. He was really, really muscular on the top portion. So I was just like, should I say something to him? And then I was realizing, well, Allison's gonna have to sit next to him this whole flight because she's already sitting down.
You leaned over and you're like, did he just say something to you? And I was like, yeah, he did.
Yeah, and I was starting to get like mad. I get these little bouts of anger, like a lot of adrenaline starts pumping, and I don't like my family to be disrespected, like any decent.
Especially
human
our
being.
little daughter.
Yeah.
She's so sweet.
All she was doing was like, "Excuse me, can I sit in there?"
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I guess. Like, what are you? What piece of human garbage? And he's probably going through stuff, and I hope he has profuse diarrhea and all sorts of bad things like that. So
I was like, I hope I give him my cold.
Yeah.
I shouldn't be rude like that. And then, God forbid, she had to go to the bathroom mid-flight, and I was like, sir, she has to get up. And it was like the worst thing ever.
That's part of the deal, sitting in the aisle. You sit in the aisle, you
chose the
expect to get
aisle.
up. Yeah, and it's unfortunate, but hey, that's
And
the
I had to
breaks.
sit next to this jackass for 2.5 hours.
Yeah, he sucked. But
So we're back home and back in the swing of things, and hopefully I'm going to start feeling more and more human by the day.
yeah.
So far, I'm still feeling like kind of hot garbage.
Well, you look all right, and that's all that matters.
Thank you. I put some makeup on today,
Oh,
actually. I
wow.
actually put my contacts in. I've just been wearing glasses and no makeup all week.
Feeling
so
like a human being.
kind of.
But no, I thank you for helping out my parents. It was a big job, but we got it done, and we're so glad that, like, we left, and it finally looks like a house. Like, and they got some furniture. It
That's
looks
amazing.
fantastic. I always tell them, like, I was just talking them up. I'm like, this is a beautiful house. It's like very nice. The backyard, like you mentioned, to a conservation. It was very, very nice. And they got a bunch of old folks around them and can buddy up and have a good time.
Yeah, they're super close to the pool, and it's just so nice. And my mother-in-law just got her furniture delivered yesterday because I went and helped. We all like kind of went together and helped pick it out, and it's so exciting, and I'm so happy for them. It's a gorgeous house. So it was a successful trip despite me feeling like disgusting garbage.
And I will say, I'll hand it to you. One last thing to say. I can't imagine how it feels to feel that bad, and you were needed physically more than like any other time in your recent memory.
God,
like because we were moving things, not gigantic heavy things, but just like things needed to be moved around and packed away and all this stuff.
And I was on my hands and knees, like going through cabinets and things.
Oh
and
man! And Allison is like a super organizer. I swear she'd make a fantastic business organizing. Like if you just like put it out there, and be like, I can help you organize, and also like pick out paint colors and stuff. Allison's very like good at looking at a wall, being like, yeah, that I think like a reddish, whatever. Yeah, I don't know what you say.
Yeah, I wouldn't say reddish, but
okay, yeah, that's why I was like,
you don't know me.
In my mind, it's like she's not gonna like this. She's not gonna like this. Make sure to say something. So I don't know whatever color's in now these days, but she'd be like, yeah, this and this here and this here. Like she just helps make decisions quickly.
Yeah, you have to be decisive, otherwise you're hemming and hawing and wasting time.
So if you're a rich person in the area, you need some help.
Just go ahead and hire
wanna
me.
Throw Allison $5,000 to help you figure stuff out, then she'll do it.
And hopefully I won't be sick when I enter your home.
Right. And I am very excited because I got myself finally a French press here. They're not paying us. I'm just actually excited about this. But it's like an insulated French press, so it'll keep my coffee. You see the
look
the
at that
steaming cup?
steam.
I don't know if you can see that
If
on
you're
there.
watching this on YouTube, boy, oh boy, there's a lot of steam coming from that carafe.
Yeah, so I don't know about you, but usually when I make my French press, I'm like trying to hurry and get to the end of it in the glass because it gets like cold at the end. And you can't reheat coffee, then it tastes bitter, and there's a whole science behind it. But this should keep it nice and warm for at least an hour or so, and at least this whole podcast episode. So
I'm happy for you, Mike.
I'll put a link to it in the comments in case you want to look. Whatever, we get a little commission.
Was it on Amazon?
Yes, it was.
Nice.
Yeah.
Are you ready to jump into this?
I am.
All right, let's do this. So this is a listener suggestion from Scarlett. Thank you so much, Scarlett. This is a story of James Joseph Richardson, his wrongful conviction, and the tragic death of 7 of his children.
Oh, wow.
So on Wednesday, October 25th, 1967, it was 6 p.m. when the CBS Evening News aired, and Walter Cronkite spoke of a tragedy that happened in the small town of Arcadia, Florida. This is a rural area with sprawling farm fields and cattle pastures. And of course, at that point in time, it was 1967. It may be more built up. I have been to Arcadia, Florida. We went to like a preserve there. You were not with me. I was with my family.
No, I was going to say, I don't think I've ever been there. And I think it's a little like east of Sarasota. Like,
It is.
It's basically like right in the middle of Florida. So like no direct beach access unless you drive a couple hours probably.
But there was like hiking trails, kayaking, horse trails, things like that. That's what we went to. So it's sprawling farm fields, cattle pastures. It sits about 45 miles southeast of Sarasota. This is where my parents actually live, in DeSoto County. 7 children from from the same family had been poisoned. 6 were dead. 1 was actively dying.
Oh, so sad.
And very quickly, I would say immediately, their father, James Richardson, he is an African-American man. He worked as a fruit picker. He was instantly the prime suspect as a homicide case was being led by DeSoto County Sheriff Frank Cline. So the devastation began that afternoon when 4 siblings within the Richardson family, this is sisters Betty Jean, she's 8, 7-year-old Alice, 6-year-old Susie May, and 5-year-old Doreen, were suddenly stricken with violent convulsions, all at the same time within 4 separate classrooms at the local Smith Brown school. And this is just after they had returned back to the school from going home for lunch. So in the meantime, this is happening at the school. Well, back at the Richardson home, 3 preschoolers from the same family were found basically dead and dying at home.
Okay, obviously a big connection there.
Yes. Police found 2-year-old James Jr.'s lifeless body in the arms of his panic-stricken babysitter. This is Betsy Reese. While at her feet were whimpering and writhing 3-year-old Diane and 4-year-old Vanessa, who were basically clinging to life at this point.
What a horrific.
Horrific. They were convulsing and in the fetal position nearby. Their autopsies later revealed that they had all ingested parathion organophosphate dust. This is readily used in this type of area because citrus farmers utilize it to kill insects. It's a pesticide. So ingestion of parathion in smaller doses, it can cause unpleasant, side effects such as headaches, nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramping, diarrhea, muscle weakness, twitching, excessive secretions, and shortness of breath. In more severe cases, which clearly this is because they're dying, it can lead to seizures, skeletal muscle paralysis, cardiac arrhythmias, respiratory failure, and the victim might become comatose if ingested.
Wow.
In a rush of judgment, Sheriff Cline informed the media that the children had been poisoned by their father for insurance purposes.
Jeez, he's just like, okay, figured it out. They had barely done any, investigation.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So by the following day, the Miami Herald called it the most ghastly crime in Florida history. Walter Cronkite's shocking report helped splash the story on international media front pages, and in the days that followed, hordes of reporters were just flocking down to Arcadia, Florida, in order to cover this case. So veteran Judge Gordon Hayes ordered an unprecedented coroner's inquest with haste, which went on to mix rumor, forced testimony, and just downright blatant lies that were truly all saturated with Southern racism. And the inquest certified that the children were victims of mass homicide at the hands of their father.
Well, I mean, so there is something, I can't wait till you tell more details because I want to learn more about what, why hopefully he was innocent, but I think you said that.
I said the wrongful conviction.
Yeah. So it's like if he was the only one there serving them lunch and they all show up, okay.
He wasn't. So the children went on to be buried in Arcadia's Oak Ridge Cemetery after the 7 small white caskets literally lined the high school gym. Ugh. I saw this picture and honestly, just right now, I got goosebumps. It's just beyond tragic to think that 7 innocent children died that day. And I'm talking a very painful death.
And like you said, this is 1967, so this is definitely tons of racism involved here.
This area especially was bad.
You see like white supremacists, they see the news that a black guy killed his kids, and all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, let's get this on the news.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, then at the funeral, there was a young girl singing, and she actually later went on to become mayor of the town, and she sang Amazing Grace at their funeral. So James Richardson was tried for the murder of one child, and this was his stepdaughter, Betty Jean, and he was convicted and sentenced to death with this one case. Of course, there were 6 other lives taken. Had James been found innocent in that case, the sheriff promised, and he said, verbatim, "We will keep trying him for each child, one after the other, until he is found guilty." Clearly, he was on a mission. He focused on James immediately, and it was just going to be his goal to get him found guilty, one way or the other. So from day one, James Richardson had been the only suspect in the case, despite the fact that at the time the children fell ill, he and his wife, Annie Mae, were 14 miles away picking fruit, when the children ate both their breakfast and lunch that very day.
And they can be confirmed and found.
Yeah.
Plenty of people said so. So, like, it's impossible that he was the one.
They're saying he pre-poisoned the food. It had been pre-prepared.
Okay.
So James Richardson was by no means an angel. He would tell you that. He had a lengthy juvenile record. He had spent time at Mariana Correctional School for Boys. 4 years earlier, it was June of 1963, he was married to someone different. This was Margie Westbrook. He did arrive at the Duval Medical Center in Jacksonville with his son Samson, and tragically, his son arrived dead on arrival. James had brought the baby in earlier that day for extreme vomiting, and the case was later closed on July 2nd, 1963, and it was confirmed that his cause of death was just natural. No autopsy had ever been done in that case. So years later, Sheriff Cline reported that Samson had died after consuming uncooked beans. Where he got this, was this factual? I don't know. And that Margie had left for Detroit with her other 3 children because she felt that Richardson was instrumental in the child's death and was afraid that the others might eat some beans and die. This could be a completely innocent virus that this child had and died, but yet he's tying it to kind of prove, see, this is what happens.
I mean, that's an easy step to take.
Right.
Yeah, he's attached. You see his kids, they die when they're around him.
On the morning of the fateful day of Wednesday, October 25th, 1967, before leaving for the fruit groves, Annie Mae Richardson prepared chicken sandwiches for her children's breakfast and a small pot of grits cooked into a stew of rice and beans for the children's lunch that day. The Richardson family were migrant farm workers who frequently moved. Both wife and husband habitually left the home for various reasons, later returning. Sounds like it was a pretty tumultuous relationship. Only 7 months before the children's death, Annie Mae obtained a warrant for arrest, attesting non-support from her absent husband. 4 days before the children died, a warrant was issued for James for desertion and non-support by his ex-wife, Margie Westbrook. She's the one that was there when the little boy Samson died.
In Jacksonville.
Yes. So police failed to really investigate anyone besides James.
I mean, he's got a lot of things connected to him.
So this is including the next door neighbor who served as the children's babysitter. This is 32-year-old Big Mama Betsy Reese, who had served the children the poisoned food on the day they all died.
I mean, that'd be my first look, in addition to the parents, obviously.
Okay, well, this is despite the fact that both the sheriff and state attorney were aware of the fact that Reese's first husband mysteriously died after consuming a stew that she had prepared for him, and that she was still on parole for fatally shooting her second husband.
Wow.
2 husbands died.
So, I mean, if you're going to be, a cop who's looking to put somebody away, there's another option here. You think that might be a little bit easier.
Yes.
But, or maybe a little harder because you're going to have to prove it and all this stuff. I don't know.
Well, yeah, but still, it's absurd to think that this woman is definitely, got some shady stuff going on behind her. She's the one that's home with the kids. She's the one that's serving the food. Never even really looked into her.
Yeah.
So when investigators responded to the Richardson home, there were no obvious signs of poison. They did note some insect spray, but did not figure that this was the cause of the poisoning. Later testing found traces of the poison everywhere. It was sprinkled in the sugar bowl, the talcum powder, inside the laundry powder that had only been purchased 1 day earlier. It was in the self-rising flour, the cold jar of used lard, the cornmeal, and in the locked refrigerator, as well as on the clothing on what both the parents and children were wearing.
That's crazy.
So it was basically everywhere. Scientists later testified that the traces of poison amounted to what could have potentially killed an entire town.
Wow.
And I wonder if James and, his wife had any symptoms, such as the headaches and such.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They didn't say. So as investigators spoke with James Richardson, he explained apparently they found this business card on him. It was in his pocket, and it listed the names and ages of the children, including the ones that did not live there. And it was from a door-to-door insurance man who had stopped by unannounced just the night before. So they took this fact and they ran with it. So the card read, Gerald Purvis, Union National Life Insurance Company. So the two investigators, this business card simply screamed motive. And when they did go on to speak with Gerald Purvis, this insurance man who came door to door, he repeatedly denied that James had purchased insurance coverage. Despite this very fact, state attorney Frank Schaub blatantly lied when he told the coroner's panel that James killed the children in order to collect from an insurance policy that he had purchased only the night before. Yes, this man knocked on the Richardson's door. Yes, he handed him the business card. No, James had not purchased any insurance.
Yeah.
This was just some crazy incidental coincidence.
This, whatever, police chief or whatever has already decided this is the reason, and he's going with it. That's the exact same way that, like, a conspiracy theory happens. You decide the outcome first, and then you find things to support your conspiracy theory, instead of finding evidence and eventually coming up with an idea of what could have happened.
And like you said, that's the easiest way.
Right,
because
then
that's the father. Let's nail him.
You can't be proved wrong if you've already decided this is the way. It's like, no, well, actually, he never bought insurance. You know what? It's fine. So now let's find something else that supports my theory instead.
But to say he did is just a lie. And this lie carried great weight in that part of Florida, as Schaub was considered a legend. Since only 6 months earlier, he gained national prominence after he outlawyered celebrated defense attorney F. Lee Bailey, proving that Bailey's client, Carl Capolino, murdered his wife via poisoning. So everyone trusts what this guy's saying. Again, he's a legend in the town. They're going to believe what comes out of his mouth. So that did not help James's case.
I'm sure James doesn't have great representation.
Right. So now we're fast forwarding more than 20 years. It's the spring of 1988, and more than 20 years had gone by since the tragedy of the murders of the Richardson children, when an old woman in a Wauchula, Florida nursing home who was suffering from dementia repeatedly told the staff and nurses of this nursing home, "I killed the children. I killed the children." This patient was... Who was this patient?
Big Mama Betsy?
Big Mama Betsy Reese was in this nursing home. So Betsy Reese was telling certain staff members.
But she has dementia too, so...
She does, but sometimes the truth comes out, because now she doesn't have the wherewithal to know
what to say,
exactly what not to say.
And I'm sorry, how many years later was this?
20 years. So she was young.
So like dementia, usually it's short-term memory loss, not long-term memory loss.
Right. Oftentimes, if you can think of family members who have had dementia, like my grandma, she didn't remember what I said 5 minutes ago, but she could tell me everything that happened 50 years ago.
Eddie Carrozza at the she talked about him
Polka place.
Polka, yeah, they dance polka.
Tiny Bubbles.
If you know Eddie Carrozza in Chicago, she talked about him all the time.
She was my grandma was Polish, and it was like this Polish
and I just
polka place.
I remember that name because she would talk about it every time. So they grab onto things that they know from the past. So Big Mama was probably like had this on her conscience, obviously, because she killed a whole family, basically, a family of children.
So Nurse Belinda Frazier from the nursing home where Betsy was staying later signed an affidavit that Reese confessed more than 100 times between the years 1985 and 1987. Journalist Peter Gallagher firmly believed that James Richardson had been wrongfully convicted and made it his mission to have him released from prison. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Somebody was on this guy's side. And, sadly, more than 20 years has passed. So he, along with South Florida investigative reporter Charles Flowers, headed to meet James at the Tomoka Correctional Institute near Daytona Beach. When they spoke with Warden Leonard Duggar, he said that there was no doubt in his mind that James was an innocent man who had served 21 years in prison by that point. During those 2 decades behind bars, he had a completely clean record. Most prisoners who are convicted of killing their children, no less 7, have an extremely tough time among their fellow inmates. They tend to be harassed and basically beaten up continuously. But in James' case, that didn't happen because nobody believed that he was actually guilty of what he was being accused of.
Interesting. I was going to ask about it because, like you said, usually you're in there. It's like, oh, you killed your kids. Now we're going to have fun with you.
Nobody believed he did it.
Interesting.
So as they spoke with James, he spoke of the last day of freedom, the day that his children died, this horrific, horrific day. He recalled sitting on a bench under a tree in the orange grove where he and his wife were working. They were eating sandwiches. It was a lunch break. And, it was about the time that the children would have been eating their lunches as well. They were sitting, chatting, and waiting for the rain to pass before getting back to work. Only a few blocks from the Richardson home, 4 of the Richardson children collapsed at their school desks, Bodily fluids rushed from their every orifice as their teachers and classmates watched in horror as they began to basically just die in front of their very eyes.
And that's so bad for all the other kids too. It's like so devastating.
Traumatic.
Obviously for the kids that unfortunately perished, but also these kids watching this, it's like an alien's taking over them, because they're seizing and all. Oh, it's so scary.
And I mean, these are like their classmates, their friends, and they're just watching them die. Ugh. So one of the teachers immediately recalled an incident that happened only 1 week earlier in Tijuana when dozens of residents, mainly school-aged children, died or were hospitalized after consuming parathion lace bakery bread.
Wow.
So as she's watching this, because obviously this is like unprecedented. They're seizing, fluids are just rushing out of their body. This is crazy. She had recalled what she had seen or read only a week earlier. So as the trauma was unfolding at school, 3 of the children were collapsing at home. As police arrived, they immediately noted a chemical smell in the air, but despite searching both the home and the shed out back 5 times over, investigators searched both the home and the shed. There were no obvious signs of any poison. The sheriff, who had been born and raised in Arcadia, immediately believed the odor was from parathion, since it was routinely used in this area of Florida on the citrus groves. After it was created during World War II, it was actually utilized and created as a gas weapon by the Nazis.
Nice.
And just incidentally was a very good pesticide. So there are no records to indicate that Reese's adjoining apartment was ever searched. When investigators spoke with her, she told the police that she had served the children breakfast sandwiches that morning, and then for lunch she had served them beans, rice, and grits. It was made earlier. It was stored inside a locked refrigerator. A chunk of head cheese was also taken from the refrigerator for Reese, who she basically dredged it in flour and then fried it up. We do know that the poison was found in the self-rising flour in the Richardson home. And this was served along with the lunch. And that is ultimately when the children went to school and collapsed. It didn't happen after the breakfast. It happened after their lunch. After breakfast, the 4 children went to school, and then they did their thing in the morning, and then they came back for lunch. They walked back to the school after eating, and this is where they soon collapsed. So it sounds to me that it was the lunch that was the problem, not the breakfast. When the Richardsons were notified, they were only told that one of their children was ill. That's what they were told because they were at the fruit groves 14 miles away working, innocently sitting there eating their chicken sandwiches. Hey, one of your kids is ill, you got to come with. They had no idea that the other 6 of their children were already deceased. So now they're coming to the hospital's emergency room. They see Betsy Reese standing outside, and she instructed James and Annie Mae, go inside, they tell you inside. As James entered the hospital, he was met with a group that included Sheriff Cline. And again, imagine being yanked out of your place of work and just being told one of your kids is sick. And now all of a sudden there's this group at the hospital that includes the sheriff. You're like, what is going on? What does my kid have, like a fever? Why is the sheriff here?
Right.
So he was obviously very confused. So the sheriff is just blatantly ignoring James's question of what was going on. Why are they there? Where are the children? And instead, Cline only asked James if he had insurance on his children. James said, no, I do not. So an hour later, suddenly this priest arrives and tells James that they need to pray. Yet James has no idea what they're meant to pray about.
For what? Yeah, what are we talking about here? I mean, okay, my kid has a cold and we're going to pray for him? Like,
he has no idea what's happening. And again, this is an hour after he's arrived at the hospital. So again, he has still not been told about what happened to his children. So this is when the priest, who James had never met before, he doesn't know this person, told him the unthinkable news. All your children is dead. James didn't believe the man, and he accused him of being a liar because that's coping.
Sure.
And Annie Mae, in the meantime, fainted from shock and grief of what she was being told. So when it came time for Annie Mae and James to basically enter a room and identify their children, Annie Mae fainted a second time. They walked through a hallway and into a room, and there the bodies of their children lay, covered in white sheets. So in the hallway, apparently 2 of the children were laying. One of the sheets suddenly moved back, and their daughter said, this was the daughter that was still clinging to life, I'm all right. I want to go home with my mother and father.
Oh.
And suddenly the child lay back down and basically died. I mean, that's just so tragic. James was in deep shock, and this was later used against him. Now, I will remind you, he's coming from a fruit grove being told one of his children is sick. He's at the emergency room faced with a group of people having no idea what's happening until an hour later, this strange priest who he's never met before says all your children are dead. And now he's being judged as his reaction of pure shock that this is proof that he's a cold-blooded killer, because he's beside himself trying to grapple with the fact that 7 of his children are suddenly gone.
Man, I wouldn't be able to move. I would just be like beside myself and just like, am I in a different world? Like, is this a simulation? What's happening here?
Exactly. And so his wife ended up fainting twice that day. So now in 1988, as a journalist sat with James at the prison, he recalled how Betsy Reese's children would routinely eat breakfast with his children, yet on that fateful morning, they incidentally were not there. So James could only continue to wonder why. Why on that very horrible, awful day had they incidentally not been there? So Annie Mae would routinely prepare the food for the day because she was going to be off with James working. She wanted to make sure that the food was there. It was basically just ready to be reheated by Betsy, who would then serve the children because, of course, they're on their lunch break at school. They don't have much time. So James could only speculate and wonder why her children weren't there on that very particular morning. What he didn't know was that earlier that morning, Reese asked her sister to drive 9 children that included her own daughter and her 5 grandchildren to Sarasota, which left only the 7 Richardson children to eat at the house that day. So only one child survived past nightfall. This was 3-year-old Diane. This was a little girl that sat up and spoke when her parents were in the room. She died tragically the next morning. It was the same morning that the town alcoholic, this is Charlie Smith, he was accompanied by Reese and incidentally found, and I'm using air quotes here, a bag of parathion in the Richardson shed, which I will remind you, police had searched 5 times over. That bag had not been there. There was no sign of poison found in their home or in that shed just the day before. So despite the fact that the shed was bone dry, the bag of parathion was damp to the touch. It was believed that whoever had placed that bag of poison in that shed was the person responsible for poisoning the children. Jail inmates later told James that Betsy Reese had been upset with him for giving her husband a ride to Jacksonville, where he ultimately stayed and refused to return home. So she basically held James responsible for the demise of her relationship.
So you
take it out on the children.
You killed my relationship. I'm going to kill your 7 children.
This is the type of logic we're dealing with.
Oh.
Many believe that her husband likely saved his own life by stepping away from her, because we do know that her previous husband had died after consuming a stew that she prepared. And then she was like on, what did I say, parole for shooting her second husband. Yeah. So yeah, this guy definitely dodged her. So back in 1967, after 7 of the Richardson children were murdered, during a press conference, Sheriff Cline announced that James had 5 other children that died of suspicious circumstances in Jacksonville. Whether or not that's true, I couldn't find any information.
Well, if that is the case, and I mean, this cop's not going to let you not find out at this time. There's no internet, so it's just like you're taking him for his word.
Exactly.
And maybe it was one kid, and he's like, well, yeah, you had 5 other kids.
Yeah.
I mean, that's damning evidence.
Right.
That's like, this guy, you're connecting it. It's like he had already kids that died of weird circumstances, and now his 7 kids are dead. I can see how you'd make that leap.
Yeah, but again, I don't know that to be true.
Right.
So again, he indicated that the motive for the crime was to collect $14,000 in insurance money, despite the fact, again, that this was unproven.
We know that's a lie.
It is a blatant lie. Sheriff Dale Carson from Duval County was bothered by this and fielded dozens of media inquiries and offered to write an official letter clearing James of any Jacksonville crimes.
Ah, okay.
So there you go.
So he's like, that guy's telling lies.
Yes.
Like straight up.
Straight up lies.
He had that one kid that you mentioned that
Samson
died for, maybe beans or whatever.
But potentially
possibly
uncooked beans. They never did an autopsy. They never proved it was from uncooked beans.
But he's man enough to stand up and be like, it's not true.
Right. But everyone was just ignoring him because, again, there was an agenda here.
Well, yeah, and you're in a small rural town in the middle of Florida that nobody knows about, basically. And it's just like, okay, well,
right.
This guy's going to jail.
James had yet to obtain an attorney and was facing Judge Gordon Hayes, who had worked in Arcadia for over 31 years. And he was one of the most powerful men in DeSoto County.
You can just picture this kind of guy. It's just like, I already know the outcome of this case here, so may as well just get right to it.
Formalities, just going through the process. So Hayes announced that James had taken and failed a lie detector test, which indicated that he had knowledge of the poisoning. He declared that he would be instructing Sheriff Cline to file murder charges against James, and the verdict was written in stone before the trial even began. Attorney John Robinson agreed to represent James pro bono. He was a white 30-year-old civil lawyer who had yet to defend someone at a criminal trial. When they first spoke, James expressed to Robinson his terrible treatment in the Arcadia jail and how Sheriff Cline would basically push him and call him horrific racial slurs. Robinson even had to remove a microphone that Cline had placed in James's jail cell. Just disgusting. On December 7th, 1967, a county grand jury returned an indictment of first-degree murder against James. Bail was set at $7,500. Soon after, new evidence came out when two fellow inmates, this is James Spot Weaver and James Cunningham, they insisted that James had confessed to them. Cellmate Ernell Washington went on to elaborate that James confided that he wanted to get rid of his wife and children because he wanted the money and to go back with his other women, I should say.
He's reading this from a script.
Yes,
it's like,
exactly.
yeah, he said he wanted money and to go back, and this is exactly what the sheriff told. Oh, wait, never mind. Just forget that last part.
He said that according to James, during the night with the wife not home, he put poison in the stuff they use and the sweet powder. He said that while Annie Mae got the children ready the next morning, James put the poison in the grits. All three men, including Washington, who was in jail for assault with intent to commit murder, were immediately released after providing depositions and agreements to testify. Of course, they're going to say whatever you want them to say.
Yeah. Oh, you let me go? Sure. I don't care.
I'll say what you want. Okay. So soon after, Washington was stabbed to death in a local pool hall. He died.
Oh, that's too bad.
So James's trial began on May 27th, 1968 at the Lee County Courthouse in Fort Myers, Florida, with Judge John Justice leading the way. He allowed the late Washington's pretrial depositions to be read because, of course, at the time of the trial, he was already deceased. State Attorney Schaub never called Charlie Smith, who found the parathion in the shed, nor Betsy Reese, who had fed the children the poison-laced food, nor Purvis, this is the door-to-door insurance salesman, to the stand. He elaborated that he didn't feel that Betsy Reese was competent or mentally alert enough. Yet she's competent and mentally alert enough to say what happened that day.
Right.
Doesn't make sense to me.
It's not fitting his agenda.
I wonder what was going on with her because she would have been only 33 at that time.
Yeah. Probably too much poison.
Probably. Because if you're handling it.
Yeah.
So not knowing what the prosecution knew about those witnesses, Robinson also chose not to call them. He didn't want any surprises. So 4 days after the trial began, on May 31st, 1968, the all-white jury deliberated for 84 minutes and came back with a guilty verdict and recommended that James be put to death. He was immediately transferred to Florida State Prison's death row. In 1971, both appeals for his conviction as well as his death sentence were denied. The following year, the U.S. Supreme Court declared that the death penalty was unconstitutional and James's sentence was just changed to life in prison rather than sentenced to death. So when journalists tracked down inmate Spot Weaver, who had testified that James confessed to killing his children to get away with it all, to get back with his wife for cheating, he admitted that he simply lied out of fear, since in the 1960s, the prison system was not a pleasant place for an African-American man. Arcadia was a location where the Ku Klux Klan marched in the annual Christmas parade.
Oh, wow. Can you imagine that? How horrific. Just allowing that to happen. It's like Nazis walking around in our parade, down the street. It's like
you can't believe that this actually happened. You cannot believe it.
And it's not worth laughing about. It's just so unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. And we're talking the 1960s.
Yeah, most of our parents were alive at this time. And voting and stuff. And
unbelievable. So this is the type of town we're dealing with, that this is not a good place for this to happen. Weaver went on to say that he had been visited in jail by Deputy John Bad Boy Boone, who was sent by Cline to assist with the investigation.
A lot of air quotes going on
here. A lot of air quotes if you're watching this on YouTube. According to Weaver, Boone was the type who simply just beat up prisoners in order to get whatever he wanted. And obviously, in this case, it was to get these guys to testify against James and say blatant lies. So when they tracked down John Boone, Bad Boy Boone, they asked him if he had threatened Spot Weaver and James Cunningham, who by this time was deceased. And he admitted, yeah, absolutely, it could have happened. So he went on to say that it was a different time back then. If the sheriff said to do something, you did it. Those were frontier times, and it was my job, is what he explained, is why it happened.
Frontier times?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like kind of like the old West.
Wild West.
In 1967?
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
So Boone said that since the sheriff told him that James was guilty, he had to be. So when they tracked down insurance man Purvis, he was in very poor health. He had horrific lung issues, COPD. He was basically like in an iron lung at the time.
I picture a sales guy door to door just smoking and going crazy.
A lot of smoking.
Eating a lot of bad foods.
Mm-hmm. So he maintained, again, what we knew, that James had absolutely not purchased insurance on his children. He had simply knocked on his door and handed him a card. He said he had no money until his payday at the end of the week. So even if James had wanted to purchase insurance, he didn't have the money to do so. So the journalists were also contacted by an Arcadia resident named Remus Griffin, who told them that his girlfriend was a secretary for State Attorney Schaub's ex-assistant Treadwell, and she had found a sealed legal box of documents stowed away in Treadwell's desk. And this included paperwork from the 1967-1968 Richardson case. It included evidence that would have exonerated James Richardson 21 years earlier. In 1979, Remus Griffin broke in, stole the box, which he then stored in his girlfriend's trailer. And now, 10 years later, he wanted them to have the box. The box contained transcripts from jailhouse snitch interviews. It contained conflicting accounts of James' so-called confessions. The whole motive of James having purchased insurance on his children was completely discounted in depositions from both James and Purvis, and included prosecution's notes about Reese's violent criminal background that suggested revenge motives for Reese. So obviously these transcripts and things are painting James as innocent and Reese as guilty, but they were never presented. They were locked away. Hidden documents suggested that Reese may have simply grabbed the wrong bag. So potentially that she didn't do it to be spiteful and seek revenge, that maybe she had just grabbed the wrong bag when she went to fry up the hog's head cheese on that tragic day.
But then sprinkled in absolutely everything.
Everything.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
So on February 1st, 1989, a special investigation into James's murder conviction was ordered. And on May 2nd, 1989, all charges against James Richardson were terminated. James was released from prison on April 26, 1989, after spending 21 years behind bars. At the time of his release, James had zero money. I think they said he had like $2 in his commissary or whatever it's called. And he went on to file a suit against DeSoto County for wrongful conviction, and he was awarded $150,000. Most of this never went to him. It literally just paid for his legal expenses that accumulated over the years. So you've wrongfully put this man behind bars for 21 years, and now he's being released into public with no money at all.
Well, I wonder... So it was probably the legal fees to get that money, right? Because the previous stuff was probably a public defender, which you get, it's included as part of your taxes.
Yeah.
So I would imagine it's to get that money, but then, maybe that guy was a piece of, or guy or girl, whoever his defender or the person.
It was a guy.
Yeah. Maybe that guy was a piece of garbage because all he got was 150. Like nowadays, you could make millions on that deal. Like there's people, that rightfully so should be getting millions of dollars for this like blatant, horrific handling of a case.
Right.
So that sucks that he got barely anything. And of course, like how old is he now? Like, being let out? Probably older.
Older, definitely older.
You're talking 20 years after everything happened, so figure 50s, 60s, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
And he's starting with like,
nothing.
A couple $100 in his pocket.
Yeah.
And like basically, close to very, nobody's going to hire him for a lot of money. He's got no skills outside of,
because he's been in prison for 21 years.
And fruit picking. So it's like, man, that's a tough gig.
So had the secret box of files not been stolen and forwarded to the governor's office, James Richardson would likely still be sitting behind bars, and the state and sheriff's actions in the case may never have been uncovered. A few years later, Schaub was suspended for 30 days for prosecutorial misconduct for his transgressions in an unrelated case where he knowingly made false statements and knowingly failed to disclose a material fact to the defense. So obviously this guy is not a good person.
Yeah.
So James's $1.2 million compensation was constantly denied for more than 20 additional years.
$1.2 million.
Yeah, so they went on to try to get this guy money because of the fact of what he'd been put through.
Oh, because I know it was like $150,000 at first.
Yeah, so then they went on to pursue more money, but it continuously was denied for more than 20 years until June of 2014, when Florida Governor Rick Scott signed a bill that provides compensation to a wrongfully incarcerated person convicted and sentenced prior to December 31st, 1979, whose case was reversed by a special prosecutor's review. Richardson may be the only individual eligible under this restrictive law, because when I was reading that, I was like, oh, that's pretty specific.
Yeah, it's
like
only
when
for
the
names
moon
James
is
Richardson.
full on the last Friday of the month, you will get your money.
It's like, why don't we just make this like a
it's just for James.
Right.
So he was awarded this money 20 years after he was released. Again, I'm sure he was struggling and suffering to get by for 20 years in the meantime.
Barely survived. I'm surprised he didn't off himself.
So 47 years after his conviction and 26 years after his release, James Richardson received a compensation check. He was set to receive 10 checks for $112,000 annually through 2025. $25,000 from each check would go to the attorneys and lobbyists who worked on James' case through the years. So in 2015, a documentary about James's case was released. It was titled Time Simply Passes. It was released on digital platforms in January of 2018. James relocated to Wichita, Kansas, where he lived with his wife, Teresa. They lived under the radar as James was fearful that people may know that he gets these checks annually and that he could potentially be robbed. So he wanted to lay low for the rest of his years. His nemesis, Sheriff Cline, lost 2 elections in the 1980s and retired to Port Charlotte, where he died in October of 2013. Betsy Reese died in 1993. James Richardson passed away in Wichita on September 16th, 2023 at age 87. And that is the story of the wrongful conviction of James Joseph Richardson and the murder of his 7 children. So nobody was ever rightfully convicted for the murder of his 7 children. I mean, obviously, it was Betsy Reese.
Well, Big Mama Betsy Reese said she did it. So.
She said it. Yeah, okay, you could say she had dementia. Maybe she wasn't in the right frame of mind. She is the person who fed the children that breakfast and lunch that day. She was the one that was with the town alcoholic when he suddenly found this bag of poison in the shed.
Yeah.
Wasn't there the day before. House had been searched 5 times. Bags wet, sheds dry. It wasn't stored in that shed.
Yeah, that's crazy. And I was curious to see if parathion is still used to this day.
Is it?
No. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency terminated most production of parathion in December 2002, and the last legal use of the chemical was October 31st, 2003.
2003. So 21 years since it's been used.
I mean, it sounds pretty damn dangerous.
Dangerous. Yeah. Very dangerous.
I mean, it sounds pretty bad.
I was looking up, just making sure I was saying it properly, and there was like this news story from Ohio that this apartment complex was like saturated in parathion and they had to evacuate and like yada yada.
Yeah, you're automatically thinking of like Roundup or something like that.
I mean, obviously all those pesticides can be very dangerous.
Well, that's
and
all
make you sick and get cancer and whatever.
Yeah, whatever it's doing to the bugs to kill it, it's doing something
going to do it to a lesser degree to our bodies. They're a lot bigger than the bugs, but still not good.
Right. Well, that's
so just, sad that this man was wrongfully put behind bars for 21 years and then had to like struggle through the rest of the 20 some odd years until he was awarded money. The least we could have done for doing this to this man was to set him up financially on his release.
Yeah.
It's just really messed up.
Yeah. Well,
and sad.
Thanks for telling his story. Something to keep in mind. And, sorry to all his children, unfortunately.
Oh, so sad.
But yeah, thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it. If you want to support us financially, I've got great news for you. There's options via Apple Podcast subscribers or Patreon. So if you go on Apple Podcasts and you're an Apple person, you can get a free 3-day trial and go try to binge all you want. Binge all you want. We'll make more.
Binge it up. Kids are going back to school. Maybe you'll have a little bit more time, maybe less time. I don't know.
Maybe car time. You're sitting waiting in the
car line.
Car lines. You're one of those people that sits there for 3 hours. Hey, more power to you.
You want to be the first one in line? Pop us in your ears.
Yeah, and then make sure to tell everybody too. Be like, hey, you got to listen to this Crime and Coffee Couple podcast because they're indie podcasters. That's what we are. We're not like this huge conglomerate, believe it or not.
Indie podcasters.
Yeah, we are. We're just mom and pa. I'm pa.
And I'm Ma.
Sorry, I got you right in the middle of the coffee.
I was taking a sip of my latte, you son of a gun.
You've only been talking for an hour. So
I know. I need to wet my whistle. I'm sick. And here you are trying to talk through make me talk during my sip.
Yeah. So thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. If you just want to support us like for free, just go ahead in our YouTube channel, subscribe to that, and then leave us a good 5-star comment on all the platforms.
Absolutely. And we appreciate you guys so much for being here. And until next time, bye.